Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air change? Not because of anything you said or did, but simply because you arrived. There's something unsettling about this phenomenon, something that goes deeper than ordinary social dynamics. Today we're diving into one of Carl Jung's most fascinating insights about human psychology, and why people who feel deeply often find themselves surrounded by those who secretly wish they wouldn't. This isn't about being paranoid or victimizing yourself. This is about understanding a profound psychological truth that Jung discovered through decades of working with the human psyche. If you're someone who feels everything, who picks up on energies others miss, who seems to naturally understand what people need before they even know it themselves, then you've probably experienced this strange contradiction. People are drawn to you, yet some of them also seem to resent you for reasons they can't quite articulate. Jung called this the shadow projection phenomenon, and once you understand it, everything about your relationships will start to make sense. We're going to explore why your emotional sensitivity acts like a mirror that some people can't bear to look into, why your authenticity threatens those who live behind masks, and most importantly, how to protect your energy without losing your gift. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how some people react to your kindness as if it's an accusation? How your natural empathy sometimes seems to irritate others in ways you can't understand? Jung discovered that this reaction isn't random. It's a predictable response rooted in the deepest layers of the unconscious mind. The key to understanding this lies in Jung's concept of the self versus the ego. Most people live primarily from their ego, the constructed identity they've built to navigate the world. But empaths often have a more direct connection to what Jung called the self, the totality of conscious and unconscious psychic contents. This connection is what gives you your intuitive abilities, your emotional depth, your capacity to see beyond surface appearances. When you enter a space, you're not just bringing your personality. You're bringing this deeper awareness, this authentic presence that others can feel even if they can't name it. And here's where things get complicated. Your presence creates what Jung would call a constellation in the unconscious of others. It activates parts of their psyche they may have spent years trying to suppress. Think about it this way. Every person carries what Jung called a shadow, the repository of all the qualities they've rejected or disowned within themselves. Maybe they've convinced themselves they're not emotional people, that feelings are weakness, that vulnerability is dangerous. Then you walk in, being naturally empathetic and emotionally open, and suddenly their unconscious is confronted with everything they've been denying about themselves. This creates an internal conflict they're not even aware of. Part of them is drawn to your energy because it represents something their soul is hungry for. But another part resents you because your authenticity highlights their own disconnect from their true nature. You become a living reminder of the parts of themselves they've abandoned. Jung observed that when two people meet, it's like mixing two chemical substances. If there's any reaction, both are transformed. But not everyone wants to be transformed. Some people have built their entire identity around being invulnerable, logical, above emotional messiness. Your presence challenges that construction, and instead of embracing the opportunity for growth, they project their discomfort onto you. This is why you might notice certain people describing you as too sensitive, or too emotional, or too much. They're not really describing you. They're describing their own fear of becoming more like you. Your sensitivity reminds them of their own buried capacity for feeling, and that reminder is deeply threatening to their carefully constructed ego defenses. There's another layer to this dynamic that Jung explored extensively. He noticed that empaths often carry what he called the wounded healer archetype. Your ability to feel so deeply usually isn't because life has been gentle with you. It's because you've walked through fire and learned to transform pain into wisdom. Your light isn't naive. It's forged from experience. Others sense this unconsciously. They recognize that you hold knowledge about transformation, about moving through difficult emotions, about finding meaning in suffering. But instead of approaching you as a teacher or guide, many people attempt to siphon your energy or diminish your light. This is the paradox Jung identified. Your very gift makes you a target. Consider the archetypal image of the sun. It gives life and warmth, but not everyone welcomes its light. Some prefer shadows because shadows hide what they don't want to see. Your empathetic energy can feel invasive to those who aren't ready to be truly seen. They may call your sensitivity a flaw, but what they really mean is that your openness reveals the artificial masks they wear. Jung worked extensively with dreams, and he often found symbolic representations of this dynamic. A common dream theme involves a luminous child or radiant being accompanied by shadow figures trying to extinguish that light. This eternal motif of the light bearer and the shadow plays out in your waking relationships whenever you feel drained, misunderstood, or quietly sabotaged by people who claim to care about you. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. This isn't really about you. When someone reacts with hidden hostility to your presence, they're not rejecting you as a person. They're rejecting the mirror you hold up to their soul. Your authenticity forces them to confront the artificial life they've been living, and that confrontation is profoundly uncomfortable. This is projection in its purest form. They see in you what they cannot accept in themselves. Perhaps they resent their own inability to connect authentically, to feel deeply, to live without emotional armor. Rather than face their own disconnection, they project that discomfort outward. You become the problem because acknowledging their own emotional poverty would be too painful. Jung emphasized that the unconscious doesn't operate rationally. When someone's shadow is stirred by your presence, they don't pause to ask whether their resentment is justified. They simply feel it, often without understanding why. And you, with your empathetic abilities, absorb this unspoken tension, these veiled judgments, these half-smiles hiding hostile thoughts. This is the hidden cost of being attuned to subtle emotional realities. You feel what others don't want to acknowledge. You sense the gap between what people project and what they actually feel. Sometimes this awareness becomes so overwhelming that you start to believe their projections. You begin thinking maybe your light really is too much. Maybe you should dim yourself to make others comfortable. But this is precisely the trap Jung warned against. When you shrink to accommodate other people's discomfort with your authenticity, you betray your essential nature. You sever the connection to the very qualities that make you whole. The solution isn't to become smaller. It's to understand the psychological dynamics at play. Jung's analytical psychology reveals that relationships are theaters where the unconscious plays out its most intense dramas. When people meet, it's not just their conscious selves interacting. Their hidden complexes, their rejected aspects, their unhealed wounds all begin to dance together. The empath often carries the projection of what Jung called the anima or animus, the inner feminine or masculine principle representing emotional depth, intuition, and soul connection. When someone encounters this archetype externalized in you, they're drawn to it because it feels like a missing part of themselves. But if they've rejected those qualities within their own psyche, they also feel instinctive anger toward it. Your existence challenges them to face the aspects of themselves they've locked away, and not everyone is ready for that confrontation. There's also what Jung identified as the martyr complex that many empaths unconsciously adopt. This isn't about wanting to be a victim. It's about being conditioned to believe that love must be earned through sacrifice. Perhaps you grew up in an environment where your sensitivity was simultaneously praised and criticized, where you learned to prioritize others' emotions over your own, to give even when it depleted you, to absorb pain in silence. This creates an energetic pattern that others' unconscious minds recognize. You become a vessel for projections, both positive and negative. People admire your warmth while simultaneously unloading their shadows onto you. They depend on you to soothe their inner darkness, while resenting the very light that makes this possible. Jung often used the metaphor of carrying a candle in a dark room. Around you are figures, some reaching for warmth, others trying to snuff out your flame. This isn't just imagery. It's a description of your daily experience. The candle represents your empathy, your authentic presence, your ability to see beyond appearances. The figures represent everyone you encounter, each responding differently to your light. Some see your flame as hope, others as a threat. But the question Jung poses is crucial. Will you guard that flame or let it flicker and die under the weight of others' resentment? This choice defines the empath's journey. It's not about becoming harder or more defended. That would only turn you into what you're not. It's about becoming conscious enough to hold your light without being consumed by the shadows it illuminates. Understanding this dynamic changes everything. The resentment you face isn't personal. It's archetypal. It belongs to universal patterns that have existed throughout human history. Look at mythology, literature, spiritual traditions. The bringers of light have always been misunderstood, envied, even persecuted. Prometheus was punished for bringing fire to humanity. Healers and visionaries have always stood on the edge between acceptance and rejection. Your life may not carry such dramatic weight, but the principle remains the same. When you embody authentic emotional connection, you reveal others' emotional disconnection. When you live from your true self, you highlight others' false selves. Not everyone welcomes this revelation. Jung discovered that empaths who understand this dynamic cease taking it personally. You begin to see resentment as information, a signal that your presence has touched something in another person's unconscious. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you start asking, "What is this showing me about them and about myself?" Because yes, even empaths have shadows. Sometimes you might feel superior in your sensitivity, as though your emotional abilities make you purer or wiser than others. Jung warned against this subtle arrogance, which others can sense and legitimately resent. The key is humility, holding your light not as a weapon or badge of honor, but as a natural expression of who you are. There's another crucial insight from Jung's work. Many empaths unconsciously believe they must fix others, that they're responsible for healing everyone's wounds. This belief, noble as it seems, becomes a magnet for people unwilling to take responsibility for their own healing. They're drawn to you, sensing you'll carry their burdens and ask nothing in return. But Jung distinguished between true empathy and self-erasure. Authentic empathy doesn't require sacrificing your essence. It requires witnessing and understanding without losing yourself. When you confuse your gift with the duty to heal everyone, you become trapped in relationships where resentment festers on both sides. Jung often spoke of the garden metaphor for the empath's psyche. You're like a beautiful garden filled with nourishing flowers. People come to this garden for different reasons, some to appreciate its beauty, some to take from it, and some tragically to trample it out of envy. The garden doesn't choose who enters, but it can choose how it's tended. You must learn to tend your inner garden, to create boundaries like a protective fence, not to keep everyone out, but to ensure only those who respect your nature can fully enter. This isn't selfishness, it's self-respect. Without boundaries, your light dims not because others steal it, but because you give it away without care. Consider a moment when someone's resentment cut you deeply. Perhaps they mocked your sensitivity or dismissed your feelings. What did you do? Did you shrink and apologize for being who you are? Or did you hold your ground quietly but firmly, understanding that their reaction revealed their own inner conflict rather than any flaw in you? This is the test Jung identified for empaths. Standing in your truth without closing your heart. Seeing others' shadows without being consumed by them. The shadow isn't your enemy, but neither is it your responsibility to carry. Your role isn't to make everyone comfortable with your presence. If your authenticity unsettles someone, that's their path to walk. Jung observed that empaths often experience profound loneliness, the isolation of being seen yet not understood. People seek your presence for the warmth you provide, yet they rarely ask who protects the protector, who heals the healer. You might find yourself surrounded by takers, never realizing that the well they drink from isn't infinite. This dynamic manifests what Jung called the shadow ideal, the internalized image of what people wish they could be, but have disowned. When others see you living authentically, their shadow ideal stirs. Instead of saying, "Teach me," they often respond with, "How dare you?" It's a peculiar form of envy, a bitter recognition that they're living behind walls of fear while you dare to exist unmasked. But Jung emphasized that your light isn't neutral. It's magnetic. Others' unconscious minds recognize that you hold something they've lost. Some approach with gratitude, others with hunger, still others with hostility. But all are responding to the same force, your connection to what Jung called the self, the living archetype of wholeness. This is why being an empath means living as a psychological alchemist, constantly transmuting others' raw emotions, their fear and anger and sorrow, into something that can be understood and healed. But alchemy requires consciousness. If practiced unconsciously, you'll absorb what isn't yours and confuse their shadows with your own identity. Jung used the metaphor of the mirror to describe this process. You reflect not only others' beauty, but also their hidden wounds. Some thank you for this reflection. Others despise you for it. But the mirror isn't responsible for what it shows. This is perhaps the hardest lesson for empaths. You cannot own others' projections. When people resent your light, it's because your authenticity reveals something they're not ready to face. This isn't your burden to carry. Your task is to remain clear and true, to polish your inner mirror so it reflects with compassion, but without distortion. Dreams often symbolize this dynamic. Jung analyzed countless dreams where the dreamer carries a lantern through darkness while shadowy figures emerge, some reaching for light, others trying to extinguish it. The lantern represents consciousness, the fragile flame of awareness illuminating the unconscious. Those shadow figures aren't enemies. They're unintegrated aspects of the psyche. In waking life, when someone resents your sensitivity, they're wrestling with their own inner darkness. You become simultaneously threat and teacher, whether you intend to or not. There's a temptation to respond by dimming your light, thinking this will reduce the threat you represent. But Jung warned this is a betrayal of your essence. Your light isn't something to hide. It's the natural radiance of a soul that has walked through fire and emerged whole. Don't confuse humility with self-erasure. True humility means shining without demanding recognition, loving without requiring reciprocation, giving without losing your core essence. The path Jung outlined for empaths requires living in the tension of opposites, holding both light and shadow, love and pain, connection and solitude. But it's also a path of profound meaning. Those who feel most deeply are often called to individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all aspects of the psyche. Jung noticed that empaths are particularly suited to this journey because they've well learned to navigate emotional and intuitive currents. Yet individuation also demands setting boundaries, claiming your right to exist as you are without apology. Without this, you remain trapped in cycles of being simultaneously adored and resented, giving until you're empty. The archetypal healer in myths and stories is rarely untouched by pain. The healer is one who has been wounded and transformed that wound into wisdom. This is why your light is so powerful. It's forged from suffering, from places where you've endured and emerged stronger. But others see only the glow, not the journey that created it. Sometimes that radiance triggers others' unhealed wounds. They resent you not because you're perfect, but because your survival reminds them of their own unacknowledged strength. It's as if they re-saying, "How can you shine when I'm still trapped in darkness?" This isn't something you can fix. It's something you must witness with compassion and detachment. Ask yourself, what does my light represent to those who resent it? What archetype do I awaken in them? Is it the inner child longing for love they never received? The shadow self that despises vulnerability? The hidden potential they fear to express? Understanding this helps you cease taking their reactions personally. There's also the question of your own shadow. Perhaps yours is the fear of being seen as selfish, the terror of appearing unkind. Maybe you give compulsively because you're afraid of what happens if you stop. Will people still love you if you're not always the understanding one, the forgiver, the emotional caretaker? The resentment you attract often mirrors resentment you hold against yourself for all the times you've silenced your needs, dimmed your voice, betrayed your boundaries. This is why self-awareness is vital. You must see not only others' shadows, but your own. There comes a sacred turning point in every empath's journey when you realize your light isn't meant to be spent recklessly, but cultivated carefully. You begin seeing that not everyone who reaches for you deserves access to your deepest self. This isn't cruelty. It's discernment. For too long, you may have believed being kind meant saying yes to every request, every demand, every subtle pull on your energy. But living this way makes you a hollow vessel, giving without receiving, shining without replenishment. Those who resent your light will gladly drain you until you're dimmed. Not from malice, but because they don't know how to nourish their own inner fire. The empath's true lesson isn't to keep feeding this cycle, but to stand firm, honoring the truth that your light is sacred. Living this way moves you beyond the unconscious pattern of savior and victim. You're not here to save everyone or carry their pain as your own. Empathy doesn't mean losing yourself. It means seeing clearly, feeling deeply, and responding with wisdom. There's a crucial difference between compassion and self-sacrifice. Compassion flows from wholeness, from understanding that every soul must face its own shadow. Self-sacrifice often flows from wounds, from believing you must give everything to be worthy of love. As you become more conscious, you recognize when someone's resentment mirrors their self-hatred, when their rejection reflects their unhealed wounds. Instead of shrinking, you learn to stand in stillness, neither fighting nor absorbing, simply holding your ground. The archetype of the empath, when fully matured, becomes the sage. The sage doesn't fear others' resentment because they understand it as part of the soul's alchemy. They know the shadow must resist before it can transform. You're being called to this path of maturity, stepping beyond the need to be liked or understood. Jung's hero's journey applies perfectly to empaths. The hero leaves comfort to enter the wilderness of the soul, meeting allies and adversaries along the way. Often the adversary teaches the greatest lessons. When you face resentment, you're being asked to claim your strength, to hold your light not as a fragile candle, but as an unextinguishable torch. This doesn't mean becoming defensive or hard. It means standing in your essence with quiet confidence, knowing your worth isn't determined by others' reactions. Your light exists for you as much as for others. Have you considered that? Empaths often live outwardly, pouring energy into everyone else while rarely turning that warmth inward. Your soul longs for your attention, for moments where you honor your dreams, needs, and fears. Within your shadow lie treasures, hidden power, unclaimed desires, your truest voice. When you integrate these aspects, you become less affected by others' resentment. You see it for what it is, a sign of their disconnection. Jung often spoke of a dream that visits empaths symbolically, carrying a vessel of light through darkness. Figures approach with different intentions, some trying to steal the flame, others to extinguish it. The dream asks, will you keep walking? Will you protect that light despite judgment and misunderstanding? This is your life's central question. Every encounter tests your resolve. When you feel resentment sting, pause and breathe. Ask what's yours to carry and what isn't. You're not obligated to absorb others' shadows or make them comfortable with your presence. The discomfort they feel is often their awakening's first step. Your role isn't to ease their pain, but to remain authentic, to be a living example of what it means to feel and love without masks. This may make you a target, but it also makes you a catalyst. People remember those who challenge them to see more deeply, even if they initially resist. Learning energetic boundaries becomes essential. This isn't about building walls, but cultivating a strong inner center. When your center is solid, you can feel deeply without drowning, love without losing yourself, give without depletion. Boundaries are your soul's garden edges, telling others where you end and they begin. When you live this way, resentment loses power over you. It becomes like a passing storm, loud perhaps, but incapable of extinguishing your flame. Remember, your light needs no permission. It doesn't require justification or explanation. It's the result of your journey, every shadow you've faced, every wound you've healed. Those who resent it unconsciously acknowledge its power. Let their reactions be what they are, reflections of their own path. Your task is simply to keep walking, keep becoming, keep deepening into who you are. The reason empaths attract those who secretly resent their light isn't because something is wrong with the empath. It's because the empath is a living reminder of what's possible. Authenticity, vulnerability, wholeness. These qualities are rare in a world prizing masks and facades. When people see someone daring to live maskless, they confront their own fear of being real. Some run from this confrontation, some attack it. But others, those who are ready, find inspiration. They see your light and think, perhaps I can shine too. Don't fear the resentment you encounter. It's not a sign of failure. It's evidence that you're shining, that your very being awakens something in the world around you. If the world resists, let it resist. Your task isn't fighting darkness, but being so completely yourself that darkness cannot help but notice. Stand in your light. Hold your flame high. Walk your soul's path with courage and tenderness. The world needs what you carry, even when it doesn't welcome it. The time will come when even those who resent your light will see it wasn't a threat but a gift, a mirror of their own unclaimed radiance. Until then, keep shining. The world depends on lights like yours more than it knows.